If you're an avid thrifter like myself, there are probably certain brands that you stumble across at the thrift store that might get you wondering, where did these brands come from and where are they now? My name is Alicia and I love making thrifting and sustainable fashion type content. And in this series, we're going to be taking a little walk down memory lane to find out how these brands started and why they no longer exist today. And today we are going to be talking about the brand Jessica.
Jessica dress. Jessica, one of my favorite vintage brands.
If you've watched my channel before, you'll know that Jessica has been a brand that's always kind of been on my radar. For some reason, I just really love their designs and usually tend to gravitate towards them at the thrift store. When I think Jessica, I think fun, feminine pieces, lots of like dresses, skirts, florals, maybe a turtleneck here and there. As you may or may not have noticed, I'm actually wearing a Jessica piece right now that totally fits that description. But it really got me thinking, where did this brand come from and why have I never seen it outside of the thrift store? As it turns out, Jessica was actually one of Sears' main private label brands that specialized in women's clothing and accessories. Sears was a huge department store chain in Canada that had a large focus on fashion.
There's more for your life. Cheryl Teagues is calling me. Gotta have it. We agree.
So before we get into the heart of the Jessica brand, we have to start at the beginning with the inception of Sears into the Canadian market.
Now in Sears' new catalog and Sears retail stores. So let's go, Canada.
In 1952, Canadian retailer Robert Simpson's Company Limited joined forces with the USA's Sears, Roebuck & Co. to create Simpson Sears Limited, a Canadian retailer modeled after the popular American Sears brand. Sears was well known for their mail order catalogs in retail locations, which was emulated in the Canadian market. And by 1953, the first Simpson Sears catalog was distributed in Canada and the first retail location had opened. Catalogs were a huge part of the Sears brand and one of the main ways that customers would shop.
There's more for your life at Sears.
If you think you know Sears catalog, wait till you see this. Sears new spring catalog is hot and cool. Not at all the catalog your mother knew.
It was marketed as a more convenient way to shop. They help you shop quickly and wisely. It's easy to catalog shop because we're as close as your phone. Sound familiar? The only difference is back then you actually had to call somebody on the phone before your order was processed, sent to the mailroom, and eventually shipped off. This was back when almost all clothing was manufactured right here in Canada, and clothing production was actually a huge part of the Canadian economy. Sears was a big part in helping that because in 1973, Sears actually hit $1 billion in sales, making it a huge success in Canada.
On Wednesday, September 25th, Sears is officially opening 8 new stores in the Toronto area. They can have all kinds of great stuff at incredible prices.
Then in 1978, after a long 25 years of doing business together, Simpsons actually pulled out of the joint venture with Sears, and the company was later renamed to just Sears Canada. After all these big changes within the company, it's likely that Sears had a little bit more freedom on how they wanted to proceed, and so the Jessica brand was born. According to an article written by the Globe and Mail, the Jessica brand was launched in 1985 as a lingerie line. It rapidly expanded into casual and career wear, dressing a generation of baby boomers who were coming out of university and landing their first jobs. The actual Jessica branding started off with a cursive font, usually in a bright pink color that really reflected the feminine and professional attire at the time. The styles consisted of long dresses, skirts, matching sets, trousers, and even shoes. Pretty much clothing that you could expect to see worn in an office. During this era, they even started the Jessica Sport label, which incorporated more loungewear to pair with the lingerie. As stated in this catalog page, Jessica Sport coordinates are fun and casual, just the ticket for a relaxed weekend or lounging around the house. Jessica was really finding their footing and building their brand during this era. And when I was doing my research for this video, I didn't even recognize this logo. So if you ever come across a Jessica piece at the thrift store with this label, it's definitely more of a rare item. After 7 years, it was time to give the Jessica brand a little bit of a refresh. And in 1992, the Jessica logo shifted into a tall, serif type font, often paired with a like Roman style column in the background. I'm not really sure what connection that has to the clothes, but it was definitely an interesting choice. This, in my opinion, was the beginning of the golden years for Jessica because this is the label that I'm most drawn towards when I'm thrifting. And hey, maybe I'm a bit biased because I love 90s fashion, but the styles in this era just hit different. I mean, these are just a few of the pieces that I've personally picked up over the years, and just like the silhouettes, the florals, it's just so good. You may also notice during this era, all of the tags have that iconic Made in Canada label. This was actually also starting to be repeatedly advertised throughout the Sears catalogs. Back in the 80s, it was kind of just assumed that all the clothing was manufactured here in Canada, so a label wasn't really necessary in the catalogs. But by 1994, Canada had actually joined NAFTA, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement, which basically allowed Canada, the USA, and Mexico to eliminate tariffs on goods. This meant that suddenly it was a lot cheaper to import foreign goods into Canada, meaning that you couldn't just assume that everything in the Sears catalog was Canadian made. So the little Canadian leaf stamp of approval definitely became a big selling feature throughout the Sears catalog. Either way, the 90s were an exciting time for the Jessica brand. During this time, the Jessie label was created, which seems to have targeted maybe a younger or even teen audience that had some more casual and playful looks. Although I don't think this era lasted very long, because I personally have never seen the Jessie label at the thrift store. I personally think it just kind of evolved into more of the Jessica sport brand that expanded from just loungewear into more broader casual wear. There was something really special about leafing through a catalog back in the day. I mean, at the time I was definitely much more interested in like circling what toys I wanted for Christmas in the Sears wish book, but what I would give to order one of these Jessica dresses from the Sears catalog today. But with the boom of the internet, Sears started to switch gears, and in 1998 they actually launched their first website. They were very quick to the game and one of the first Canadian retailers to do so. You know what? I lied. Forget about the catalogs. I miss when websites looked like this. The fun graphics, the simple fonts, the confusing menus. Like today, websites are so boring and they all look the same. Although the catalog was still available and popular, the website kind of became a nice companion piece and an introduction into the digital marketplace. Give it a few years and the website became a little more functional and even more fun. Like, this is truly the best use of gifts. Like, why don't we make these anymore? And Jessica was of course one of the main brands featured on the Sears website. And although a lot of the website has been lost over time, I did find a few Jessica pieces that managed to slip through the cracks, so we can kind of get an idea and a feel for what it was like to be shopping for these items back in the day. The Jessica brand was truly thriving because by 2001 it was actually estimated to be worth $200 million. Unfortunately, this is also what I would consider to be the peak for Jessica, because in 2001 was also the year that China had joined the World Trade Organization. Suddenly, there was a huge shift and more goods started being imported from China because of how cheap it was. You can definitely see this reflected in the catalogs as that Made in Canada stamp of approval started to become rarer and rarer to see. And in my opinion, at this time, there was also probably a shift in quality. Now, just because something's made in China doesn't necessarily mean it's bad quality. There are plenty of high quality goods manufactured in China today. But with that being said, I wouldn't doubt that quality control became a lot harder when manufacturing was done abroad. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jessica were to cut corners and sacrifice the quality of the clothing in exchange for cheaper labor. At the same time, the style started to shift from those classic 90s looks into more of the Y2K style. This was a really sweet spot in fashion for me because I feel like it was the perfect blend of 90s fashion with just a hint of turn of the century influence. But big changes were coming because by 2005, the federal government made apparel free to import, meaning that it was basically a free-for-all and clothing was being imported from all over the globe for cheaper than ever. This pretty much blew up fast fashion, and that Made in Canada little stamp of approval was pretty much nowhere to be seen at this point. At the same time, Jessica actually went through its second rebrand, officially marking the end of an era. The new logo featured a really simple, like lightly cursive font, kind of reminiscent of the original logo. And once again, of course I'm biased, but these new styles just seemed a lot more boring to me. And the styles weren't the only thing going downhill, because this was actually the beginning of when Sears in general was starting to see an overall decline in sales. Well, Sears must have been feeling pretty desperate at this point because only 3 short years later, Jessica decided to go through another rebrand. This was partially due to the fact that one of their major competitors, The Bay, had recently hired a new and esteemed head of fashion, and Sears wanted to keep up. This time leaning even further into that cursive text font with a blue and brown motif that really encapsulated 2008. Unfortunately, the styles in this launch were just so 2000 and late in my opinion. Like, I'm sorry, but these styles just don't do anything for me. And I'm not the only one, because at this time, women were actually reluctant to admit that they wore Jessica. One woman said, "I never really talked to anybody about the brand. It's just I got it at Sears and I got it on sale." Another woman said, "I would be embarrassed to say I buy it because it's considered to be old lady-ish." At this time, Sears apparel was down 6.2%, and I don't think we can just blame those numbers on the recession. The problem is Sears decided to keep the Jessica brand catered to their original customer base, who had now reached the beginning of their middle age, rather than creating styles geared to a more younger generation. There is nothing wrong with this marketing strategy, of course, except for the fact that it sounds like their loyal customers didn't want anything to do with the brand. But Sears was really pushing for this brand, and Jessica was being put in the spotlight more than ever before, with dedicated catalogs and a lot more mention of the brand name. Between 2003 and 2011, Sears had lost $1.6 billion in revenue and was rapidly starting to lay off employees and even close store locations. And it was clear that Sears was struggling. Although Sears was one of the very first retailers to go online in Canada, it just seemed like they couldn't keep up with the online market.
Thanks for clicking on the catalog section of Sears.ca. We've designed this section to make your catalog shopping fun, easy, and up to the minute.
Perhaps they were too focused on pushing their catalog, a shopping medium that, let's be honest, was dying. I feel like they really tried to counter this by having even more brand names available online, but that didn't really seem to help. And with Target to soon be entering the Canadian market, Sears once again was feeling the heat. And what does Sears do when they feel threatened? They rebrand. So in 2012, they made one final Jessica rebrand. The rebrand, of course, included a new logo with a simple sans serif type text, often accompanied by this little like cutout J logo. A pretty minimalist choice that once again really reflected the time.
We told Annie we were taking away her Jessica dress for a week.
In that case, I'd rather wear a burlap sack.
But unfortunately, it just wasn't a bold enough change to save the fate of Sears as we know it. It was starting to become very obvious, even to the public, that Sears was in trouble. So much so that they probably spent what little budget they had left on this commercial with Mike Myers.
Is Sears Canada going away?
We're not going anywhere. You of all people should know not to believe everything you read in the papers.
This commercial is honestly really ironic to watch because just a few years later in 2017, Sears Canada announced that it would be closing its stores for good. And with Sears ceasing to exist, the Jessica brand died with it.
You'll be the first place. I'll always try, 'cause hardware now has a softer side. Come see the softer side of Sears.
It's really bittersweet to see the progression of Jessica over its 32-year span, from outfitting a generation of young, aspiring women to slowly decaying and being more known as like a cheap mall brand. Although Jessica never really had a moment in the spotlight, I truly feel that it was an underdog in Canadian women's fashion. It was never anything fancy or high-end, let's be honest, it was being sold in the same store that was known for their home appliances. But Jessica was a stylish brand that people could rely on. And maybe like Van Gogh, we can appreciate Jessica even more now that she's gone. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. It was honestly really fun and like refreshing to make from my usual thrifting content. And if you were a Jessica customer back in the day and remember what it was like to be shopping at Sears for Jessica clothing, please, please, please leave a comment and let me know what it was like and your thoughts on the brand. I'm also just going to pop up a little timeline here on the screen for any thrifters interested in dating their Jessica pieces when they're out thrifting, so feel free to screenshot. And I would absolutely love to make more of these videos, so if you guys have any suggestions on what brand I should do next, definitely leave it in the comments below. But as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next week.